Okay, guys, so the last outline was pretty dramatic. Don't you think we are there at the beginning of the road to revolution? So, I want you guys to go to Google Classroom and follow along with us towards Imperial Reorganization. We are talking about things like the Stamp Act, township duties, and the Boston Tea Party. You won't want to miss it. Head over to our Google Classroom Imperial Reorganization. So, let's start with a deep discussion on the Stamp Act. The peace treaty that ended the French and Indian War in 1763 eliminated New France as a military threat to the British colonies and marked the start of the march towards American independence. The war efforts and British Prime Minister William Pitt's decision to retain large number of troops in the American colonies after the conflict doubled Great Britain's national debt. In an effort to raise revenues, Parliament enforced the Navigation Acts, which listed specific commodities that could be shipped only within the English Empire. However, Britain's attempt to make the colonists abide by the shipping regulations guaranteed little revenue due to an increase in smuggling. Pitt's successor, George Grenville, took a different route to force the colonists to pay what he believed was their fair share for the services of the British Army stationed in America. In 1764, Grenville pressed Parliament to pass the Sugar Act that placed tariffs on sugar, wine, coffee, and other items imported by the colonies. The law angered Americans who claimed that Britain had no right to tax them because they had no representation in the Parliament. Grenville countered that every member of Parliament represented every member of the British Empire, but the colonists refused to pay the tax and continued to smuggle goods. So this is known as no taxation without representation. And it was big in the colonists to drum up support for the revolutionary efforts. Hey, you can't tax us if we don't have equal representation in Parliament. But Grenville countered that every member of Parliament is responsible for every British person. So, yes, they had representation, but the colonists refused. The inadequate funds generated by the Sugar Act forced Grenville and Parliament to enact a Stamp Act that placed taxes on all printed materials, including legal papers, playing cards, and newspapers. No one could sell pamphlets or newspapers or distribute diplomas or licensing without first purchasing special stamps and placing them on those printed materials. Grenville believed that the colonists would accept a tax with little objection, since similar taxes was commonplace in England. But Americans considered the Stamp Act to be a direct tax paid directly to England rather than to their own legislatures. and again challenged Parliament's authority to tax without representation. So we hear this theme. They keep taxing us, but we have no representation in the Parliament, which is Congress for Britain. And this will be a theme going forward up until the American Revolution. The colonists also grew suspicious of the buildup of British troops in America, since the colonies finally seemed to be safe. The Proclamation of 1763, which Parliament enacted to prohibit white settlement west of the crest of the Appalachian Mountains, reinforced the fear that the British troops were not stationed in America to protect the colonists. Many patriots believed that the British government planned to use the soldiers against Americans and suppress their freedoms by enforcing the Navigation Acts and collecting taxes. In October 1765, the Stamp Act Congress, comprised of delegates from 9 colonies, petitioned Parliament to repeal the act. So self-governing steps that are commonplace in the United States Constitution and our way of life. Grenville ignored the pleas of the colonists and ordered the tax to be implemented. Resistance to England's attempts to tighten control over the colonies grew violent when organizations such as the Sons of Liberties staged riots and vandalized the homes of the stamp distributors. The mobs threatened the safety of the stamp agents and their families and intimidating them into resigning their post. By the time the new law went into effect, it was unenforceable because there were no stamp distributors left in the colonies to sell the stamps. Many Americans formed non-importation pacts that drastically cut the amount of goods purchased from England. So they were doing a mass boycott of Britain's products. British merchants, manufacturers, and shippers suffered from the reduced trade and pressed Parliament into repealing the Stamp Act. The colonists lifted their boycott on British goods and celebrated their victory against the Crown. Their jubilation, however, was short-lived. On the same day Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, it passed the Declaratory Acts, which reaffirmed England's authority to pass any law it desires to bind the colonists and people of America. The colonists remained subordinates, and the British government pronounced its complete and unqualified sovereignty over its North American colonies. So the American colonies feel like the Britain is not taking good care of them, and it's kind of like they're this back and forth between Britain and the colonies for taxes and the Declaratory Acts and all those things. Okay, let's talk about the townshend duties. The repeal of the Stamp Act did not end Britain's plan to tax the colonies. In 1767, Chancellor of the Exchequer Charles Townshend proposed enacting new custom duties on the most popular items imported by the colonies. Parliament approved the Townshend duties, which taxed a wide variety of imports including glass, lead, paints, silk, and tea. Unlike the Stamp Act, the new levy was an indirect tax payable at American ports. During this period, Parliament also implemented several administrative measures. It created a board of custom commissioners to enforce trade regulations and established vice admiralty courts to deal with colonists who violated the law. The British government paid the salaries of colonial governors with money collected from the Americans, so the wages could not be withheld by colonial assemblies. Parliament decreased the number of British troops in North America and placed the financial responsibility for maintaining the presence of the remaining soldiers solely on the colonists. Patriot leaders responded to the Townshend duties just as they did when the Stamp Act was announced. They boycotted British goods. This time, however, their efforts to disrupt the British economy did not produce the same results. Many colonists were not concerned with the new tax because it was small and indirect, and though the growing network of smugglers, they were able to find other avenues to get their goods. Samuel Adams, one of the most outspoken proponents of the Non-Importation Pact, encouraged street mobs to involve merchants in the boycotts, including those loyal to the crown. As conflict in the colonies intensified, Britain transferred 2 regiments of troops to Boston. The presence of the red-clad British soldiers patrolling the city's streets convinced colonists that their liberties were being destroyed, and resentment towards England escalated. Fistfights occurred regularly as Americans taunted the redcoats and dared them to fight back. Leaders of both groups realized that one incident could start a devastating riot, and yes, it did. We're about to talk about the Boston Massacre. And that's very important as we move forward, because the Americans felt like the British wasn't paying enough attention to them, right? So they were about to do something about it. On March 5th, 1770, tension between the two forces peaked when a small group of colonists threw snowballs at a British soldier guarding the custom house. The crowd grew in size as the participants jeered towards maliciousness. When the intimidating mob moved closer to the building, the British soldiers panicked and fired into the crowd. 5 Bostonians were killed and several more injured. Among the dead was Crispus Attucks, a runaway slave and one of the primary instigators of the incident. Colonists referred to the violent confrontation as the Boston Massacre and demanded justice. Future President John Adams offered his services as the British soldiers' defense attorney to make sure they received a fair trial. All of the soldiers subsequently were acquitted except for 2, who were convicted of manslaughter. On the very day the Boston Massacre took place, Parliament, at the urging of the new Prime Minister, Lord North, repealed all of the township duties except that on tea. During the next 2 years, colonists' attempts to enforce the boycott against British goods weakened, and an uneasy truce prevailed between the American patriots and the British government. So things were quelling down after that incident, and the new Prime Minister was elected across the pond. So, in part 2 of this video, we are going to be talking about the Boston Tea Party, because tensions aren't quelled for long. See you guys in part 2 of this video.